Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm Tom Rosenberger, the Interim Assistant Dean and Director of Online Programs here at Albany Law School. I want to welcome all of our panelists and attendees today. Today, we're thrilled to host an expert panel on leading innovation, security, and privacy at the pace of change. I have just a few housekeeping items before I introduce our moderator for today's event. Closed captioning is available during the webinar. You'll find the controls at the bottom of your screen. This webinar is being recorded, and a link to the recording will be included in a follow-up email that we send to today's registrants. So be sure to share that with your friends and colleagues once you get it. And we also want to let you know that we share our recordings on social media, including LinkedIn, where you'll find a wide variety of impactful content from the law school, such as our Women's Leadership Initiative events, projects and opportunities from our in-house public interest law firm, the Justice Center, and happening now analysis and perspective from our faculty on breaking issues. So for today's webinar, the Q&A function is available for you to post questions. Our moderator and panelists will be able to see those questions, and we'll try to incorporate some of them throughout or perhaps at the end of the program. And finally, when you leave today's webinar, please do fill out the brief survey that will pop up on your screen, and my colleague Nicole is also sharing throughout the event in the chat panel. This survey and your feedback helps us to refine our programs and to make sure that we're planning future events that are of interest to you. Okay, so related to today's event, Albany Law School offers a number of fully online graduate programs that serve professionals looking to advance their careers in various industries. These are not just for lawyers. Courses provide a legal and regulatory perspective on an industry in which you may already be working as an attorney or not. Our programs are designed for flexibility with the adult learner in mind. So people looking to fit an advanced degree into their busy lifestyle, this is designed for them. Our courses take a practical approach, and our faculty are current industry practitioners whose experience, connections, and personal insights are among the things our students actually tell us they value the most. Our cybersecurity and data privacy program was the first of its kind at any US law school. And I want to play for you a very quick video highlighting the program. Just bear with me while I get that loaded.
Hi, I am Dean Antony Haynes, and I created the Cybersecurity and Data Privacy program at Albany Law School to help professionals like you advance their career.
Law.com reports that data privacy and cybersecurity officers are in high demand with little competition, and IAPP reports that 42% of all cybersecurity and privacy professionals hold a professional degree. Click below to learn more, and we look forward to speaking with you about how Albany Law School will help you advance your career to the next level.
Okay, thank you, Dean Haynes, who you will meet brief in a moment because he is our moderator for today's event. So just to let you know a little bit more, we offer a 9-credit advanced certificate option, graduate level certificate, a 30-credit master's for those with or without a legal background, as I said, and a 24-credit LL.M for attorneys looking to better apply their knowledge of the law within this field. The LL.M can be completed in as little as 12 months. I noticed that on today's registration list for this event, there are a lot of Albany Law alumni attending today's webinar, which is awesome to see. And so I thought I'd mention, in case you don't know, that we do currently offer a 50% tuition discount for any of our online LL.M programs for Albany Law alumni. So maybe something to consider. And our other areas, our other program areas are health law and healthcare compliance, human resources law, leadership and policy, financial compliance and risk management, and launching in 2022, we're very excited about a brand new program that's been a long time coming for Albany Law School, government affairs and advocacy. So if you'd like to learn more, the contact information is there on the slide, or of course you can find it on our website. And as for this webinar series, our next event will be on October 13th at this same time, 1 p.m. Eastern. It will be a fireside chat on the emerging geocultural pillars of data privacy laws around the globe. Very exciting topic. So be sure to register for that one, and the registration page will be up on the website in the next day or so. Without further ado, let me introduce you to today's moderator today. Dean Antony Haynes is the Associate Dean for Strategic Initiatives and Associate Professor at Albany Law School, and he also happens to be the Faculty Program Director for the Online Cybersecurity and Data Privacy Program. Welcome, Dean Haynes, and if you'd like, you could briefly introduce the panelists. We didn't want to take a lot of time reading huge bios, but they're available on the event website.
Hi, thank you for that introduction, Tom. As Tom indicated, I'm Antony Haynes, a professor and dean here at Albany Law School, and also the founder and creator of the Cybersecurity and Data Privacy program here. Rather than me try to do any kind of justice or injustice to the tremendously wonderful backgrounds of our panelists, I'm going to ask them to say one sentence about themselves each, and then we'll go directly into the questioning. So beginning with Deb, and then we'll go to Tony and then Alan. So Deb, really very quickly about yourself for our guests.
So former Chief Information Security Officer for the state of New York, retired in 2019 after 30 years of public service. Never planned to pursue a career in cyber. So if you're thinking in that direction, good, but it just takes you where you're going to get taken. I'm a cyber strategist who can sing.
Thank you, Deb. And Tony.
Good morning from the West Coast. It's really great to be here today. I'm Tony Ogden. I'm the Chief Legal and Administrative Officer at the Bates Group. I have a long and history of working both in the private sector and public sector. Most of my work does involve cybersecurity and data privacy at some level. So I jumped into the LL.M program this summer, and I'm just really excited to be here amongst this really esteemed panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. And last but not least, Alan.
Hi, everyone. Alan Brandt. I'm currently the Executive Director and Associate General Counsel and Chief Privacy Officer at a financial services firm. And I started doing privacy in 2004 before most firms even had consideration of what that might be. And so, as you've heard others say, didn't think I was getting into privacy, but it came that way, and it's been a terrific ride. And if you see up on the screen, I am a graduate of this program, and I've come back to be also an adjunct professor. And so I think there's a great mix of privacy and cyber that would be of great help to you.
Thank you, Alan. Alan was in our first cohort of students, and so he's been an exemplar of the success of our program. Tom has reminded me that I need to introduce the polling function in polls, and I believe that Tom's going to launch a poll right now called Untitled Poll. You should see it pop up on your screen. The first question is, one, what is your current relationship to cybersecurity and data privacy? And then secondly, the second question is going to be, what do you see as a CISO's primary responsibilities? And if you could answer those two questions, that would be very helpful to us. Tom, should I go ahead and continue on with the fireside chat while we are having our attendees answer the polling questions? So the format for this event is a little bit less formal, a little bit less focused on the black letter law and the statutes and cases, and more about the trends and direction that we see leaders in this space really pursuing going forward. So what I'm going to do is be the moderator, and I'm going to pitch questions to our panelists, Deb and Tony and Alan, and we'll do kind of a round robin conversation. Now, I do have written questions, and so I will be reading a little bit from my notes to make certain I get the keywords in the questions. So let's go to we have the poll results here. So we'll pause on the questions for a moment and go to the poll results. So on the first question about what is your current relationship to cybersecurity and privacy, we see that the biggest single category was other. And so maybe in chat, some of our attendees can type what they meant by other. And then after that, we have executive, attorney, privacy professional, law enforcement, and academic, about even across the board. On the second question, we have, what do you see as a CISO's primary responsibilities? The single biggest category is policies and controls to manage risk And then the second biggest category are security, technology, and operations, followed by evaluating the cyber threat landscape. And then lesser were the areas of auditing and compliance, and also this idea of cyber skills and talent managers. Oh, and I think I may have left out as one of the top 3 or 4, cyber awareness training and education. So it seems like 4 or 5 of these categories are very important from the point of view of our attendees as being part of a CISO's primary responsibilities. Tom, was there anything that I missed there? Oh, I see Tom vanished, so I'll assume that it's okay. And maybe in the fireside chat, we might elucidate some more of those ideas here. So let's hop into our very first question. I'm going to pitch it to Deb as our former New York State CISO. And the question here is pretty straightforward. From your point of view, Deb, what is the most notable trend and challenge that organizations are now facing in cybersecurity and data privacy? Or to put it another way, what are the primary drivers behind the growing importance of cybersecurity and data privacy? And what is it that organizations are really most struggling with? And Deb, you're still muted, so if you could unmute yourself and start over again, it'll be awesome. You know, it's not a Zoom meeting. If you forget to,
it is not a Zoom meeting unless someone does that. So I'm glad it was me and not my other colleagues. So I'm going to address the primary drivers first, which include growing dependencies on information technology, the acceleration of business transformation and digitalization, rapid migration of data applications and compute to the cloud, right? All of those things. 2020 was a unique year. It forced many organizations to rapidly adapt to meet these new challenges. And at the same time, cyber actors were refining their tactics and taking advantage of shifts in how business operate. So phishing continued to pose a significant challenge, still most common type of cyber attack, mainly because it's effective. It's easy to get sensitive data or login credentials and introduce malware through an endpoint, easier than to accomplish those goals through other means. Ransomware has been a growing threat. High-profile attacks have demonstrated that it's profitable, so that drove a rapid increase to cybercrime groups. I think on average, the reports are coming in that ransomware claims a new victim every 10 seconds worldwide, which is insane, right? And cost $20 billion in 2020, an increase of 75% over the previous year. So it's offered as a service. Don't even have to be high-end or technical to do it. Double extortion has been a recent trend. Instead of simply encrypting your files and demanding payment, they demand a ransom for recovery, and then they also try to sell your data on the black market. A recent example, of course, was the Colonial Pipeline. And then last but not least, of course, there's the exploitation of the risk areas of remote work. The rush to stand up all the remote work programs left gaps that can be actively exploited. And now many organizations have zero intention to go back because employees actually prefer remote work. So there's a lot of opportunity in that area, and employees need to access corporate resources. So as a result, the cybercriminals are taking advantage of that, exploiting password security and VPN vulnerabilities and stealing data and planting ransomware. So those are some of the things, along with cloud adoption. Security is lagging behind in cloud adoption, in my humble opinion. The infrastructure is different from on-prem, and the differences posed by a hybrid infrastructure introduce unique security challenges. And many organizations, I think, are still working to understand and deploy proper security controls.
Yes, these are all very important trends. And I suspect we will have a similar perspective from Tony from the West Coast.
Yeah, well, thanks, Antony, and thanks, Deb. I was going to say what she said. But seriously, I think one of the new technology issues, Internet of Things is having an impact on business like we never saw. It's the thermometer in the fish tank that you have in your office that actually is accessible, that gets exploited and actually jumps into your network. The proliferation of business email compromise and ransomware. I'm going to just take a little bit of a different angle than Deb, because she spoke so eloquently with respect to all of the risk on ransomware. It's about fortifying the human firewall. You'll hear me talk about that a lot. The importance of really integrating security training into the culture of the organization, making security a real cultural aspect of the organization, because ransomware isn't isn't the only problem. It's how the ransomware got into the system that is the problem. And that's usually from a click from somebody. And it's usually a very simple mistake that somebody has made, clicked on the wrong link. So education and training, I think, is really critical. Remote work risks are obviously an evolving trend and will continue to be. We don't have the ability to be able to control anybody's home networks. And so making certain that our remote workforces are deploying and employing the most rigorous cybersecurity infrastructure in their homes, I think, is really critical. So
thank you, Tony, for that additional nuance. And that brings us to Alan, who can tell us a little bit about maybe the point of view from the DTCC.
Well, I'm going to look at it from a different view. And, in 1974, the US passed the Privacy Act, which also created the FIPS, the Fair Information Practice Principles, which still exists today as, in my opinion, the cornerstone of all privacy laws globally. What's changed probably in the last 5 years, so this, predates pandemic, is data is global. And it's very hard to be an organization today that only exists in the United States, for example. And so you are probably transferring data, and people in the US tend to forget that even an email is personal data. So you are probably transferring data from Europe to the US, or the US to Latin America or Asia. And companies are now needing to get up to speed. What does that mean? What is this? You have multiple jurisdictions in Europe and elsewhere who are attaching data to the individual. So I'm a European citizen, my data is now sitting here in New York, but I'm still covered under the GDPR, the European Privacy Reg. And so I need to understand what that is. And the other piece that goes along with that is consumers are much more aware today than they were a few years ago. Where's my data? Look at all the things happening just in the last week with Facebook, and the Wall Street Journal article on how they were targeting children, and now they're talking about what are we doing with changing Instagram, and what are we doing with our oversight board, and all the things that are happening there. And every time there's a data breach, within 24 hours, the organization is now a defendant in multiple lawsuits. It's not unusual to have 30 to 40 different lawsuits at one time that you're attempting to grapple with after an incident. And so this entire environment, which is very different today than it was just a few years ago, I think has changed the culture of the organization and how they think of this.
Thank you, Alan. That's great. And now that you were the last respondent on the first question, we're going to make you the first respondent on the second question, which is this. Okay. Over the past 18 months, because of the pandemic, organizations in virtually every sector have experienced really unprecedented levels of change as the pandemic has accelerated migration of data, applications and workloads into the cloud. It has increased demand for online services, and really has created a mass need for flexibility in remote and hybrid work capabilities. So the question here is pretty direct. What are some of the notable practices and actions that organizations are taking in order to strengthen their capabilities in this area of remote work and hybrid work?
Well, there's a couple things. If your organization has now decided to move things to the cloud, that now changes your thinking. Previously, everything may have been in-house, and now all of a sudden, some of it may be in-house and some of it may be in a cloud provider. And I hear a lot of complaints of, oh my God, the cloud provider isn't working the way I want it. We can't possibly, they're not doing this for me, or it doesn't work this way. And I think it's somewhat of a two-way street. I think the cloud providers do a fabulous job of network security. They spend billions of dollars a year. You don't really hear, the big three, AWS, Microsoft, Google, having data breaches on their own. And so I think they do a great job. But then if your organization is expecting breach notification in a particular way, well, if you think about it from yourself, if you have 1,000 clients and every client comes to you and says, well, if there's an incident, I want a phone call and I want an email and I want you to fill out this form, that doesn't happen. And so you need to start thinking, okay, if we're going to use the cloud, how does that change my security posture? How does that change, as I just mentioned a moment ago, does it maybe or maybe not, does it change what I'm doing with global data transfers? It may help you, it may hinder you. How is my incident response different? Do you need to test that? I would think, yes, it's probably different. You know, an incident coming from a cloud provider is going to look and feel and have different inputs than your own. How is that integrating together? Do you have tools to monitor this? So this whole mentality of what your organization now looks like, where it's in this, what we'll just call a hybrid environment, some remote, some in-house, needs to change. And I think those of us on this call and those of us who are involved in privacy and cyber and legal and compliance and all the things associated with it need to think differently than we have been in the last years.
Thank you, Alan, for that great insight. So I'll switch to Deb, and Deb, perhaps in responding to Alan's perspective, there may be a point of view you've seen from either your consulting clients or perhaps from government entities like New York State as they've transitioned into this hybrid work environment.
All right, so most leading organizations are expanding multi-factor first and foremost to reduce the risk of stolen credentials being used to gain unauthorized access. And that includes a really interesting practice, which I endorse, which is implementing MFA on your backups. One of the many areas where improving simple defensive actions is possible. They're also getting their asset inventories under control. There are technology solutions that help discover and maintain a good, solid, current asset inventory. And how can you protect anything if you don't know what it is you have? First of all, data, assets, resources. As Alan said, most organizations already shifted to a hybrid approach. And in moving there for all the reasons, deployment, management, cost saving, security, they're deploying cloud security policy solutions to ensure that proper policy consistently follows your data, wherever it's stored, wherever it's used. Zero trust is also a buzzword out there, right? It's not a new principle. It's not a new thought strategy, but there are various models that are now getting a lot of traction, tenets, pillars, principles, all of which focus on protecting resources, moving defenses from static network-based perimeters to perimeter-less architecture and security plans and controls that match it. So it assumes there's no implicit trust. It grants access based on re-verifying, revalidating who you are. Identity validation is absolutely foundational. So if you haven't got that down pat, that's something that a lot of organizations are working on. Authentication and authorization are performed before any access to an enterprise resource. Encryption throughout the stack is also being used aggressively to protect data. But most organizations, the interesting point is that most organizations aren't able to shift quickly and go all in on zero trust strategies. It's a journey. So they're choosing frameworks like NIST and Forrester and assessing where they are and what they have to protect, and then aligning and leveraging what they have to tailor their plan forward.
Thank you, Deb. And perhaps we have another angle from our colleague from the other coast, Tony.
Thanks. So I again, echoing what Deb and Alan have both said, I think, deploying zero trust philosophy. I'm in a smaller organization. We're not a huge multinational corporation or anything like that. Smaller organization. So I wear the hats of both the chief general counsel, chief operating officer, chief information security officer, and chief risk officer. And I think that gives me a little bit of an advantage to in some respects, because I'm integrated into our cybersecurity response and all of our information security, as well as having the insight into the legal frameworks that need to be part of that. So I think for anybody who's in a smaller organization or mid-sized organization, I think that crosswalk and that integration of all of your resources in the organization is really critical to promoting kind of the culture that you want to have in the organization, but making sure the right people are talking to one another, because zero trust philosophy and zero trust architecture, the philosophy itself has to be enterprise, right? It can't just be all about what happens in IT. It has to really be a philosophy throughout the organization that you really encourage and create. When you're using MFA, again, I can't emphasize that enough. We see every single day where a lack of MFA is causing problems within an organization and creating significant risk. Having an incident response plan, testing the incident response plan. If there's one thing that happened during the course of this last year, and I suspect we'll talk a little bit more about this as we go on, but having an incident response plan that is tested. This was really critical when everybody moved to remote, to really ensure that you've got not only your endpoint protection, but your people involved in that incident response plan, and that you can execute on it in a remote environment. Being able to test drive an incident response plan while you're in, on-prem is one thing. Being able to test drive that while you're all remote is a completely different, program. So it's really important that you're testing that. You can do all the technical upgrades and everything, but again, you have to have the people in place and the support of the people that I think are really helpful. One other, I think, thing we learned during the pandemic is the importance of making certain that your people have the technology and the tools to most effectively do their job in the easiest way. And really trying to, again, we're talking about innovation here a little bit, is working with your teams to try to innovate about how to employ technology in a manner that's going to be efficient, but it's really going to be security first. So those are just some additional thoughts.
So Tony, since I have you on the hot spot right now, I'm going to press back. So in my former life, I was a computer science professor. Now I'm a law professor. So I've gone from being a techno fanatic and technophile to becoming a technophobe, a little bit of a Luddite. And so I'm going to push back on multi-factor authentication, this idea of making life easy for the employees. Isn't there a tension here? Because having to verify every smart device and iPad and laptop and computer over and over again seems to be inconvenient and the opposite, and really leads to a lot of hardship. So is there a strategy or a cultural lesson here that we can really apply to help get employees to really get into the necessity for these new features?
Yeah, so Dean Haynes, I think that there was some reticence. I mean, we saw early on some reticence around this. We just really started to build in a lot more training into our program. And once people started getting used to the technology and understood the importance of the technology and how the technology itself and the deployment of the technology was protecting their assets, I mean, we know that people have actually gone and implemented MFA in their home environments as well. And they're taking some of the security that they're learning at work and they're taking in their own personal lives, having MFA on their own personal, smartphones, on their iPads, on everything else to ensure that they're increasing the security. So I think it's becoming a little bit more understood. And the problem with MFA is it's not the one solution that resolves all. I mean, as we look towards other technology capabilities like Windows Hello or single sign-on, effective single sign-on, right? That's secure. I think we're going to be able to help minimize some of that reticence around adopting that. But again, I think what we've seen in our organization, at least, is an embrace of the technology and an embrace of the security because of an understanding of the importance to the organization. I'm certain Deb has an opinion on that though too. Yeah,
that's terrific that it's being embraced. I have to say that may not be the case across the board. So there may be, I see Alan and Deb smiling here. They have a different view. And I guess I should probably do a final touch on this topic is, are there any other strategies or lessons that we haven't already discussed that are really important that we can take away from this whole pandemic transition experience to the hybrid remote learning model? And I'll start with Alan and then Deb.
So I sit in my organization on a future of work committee, for lack of a better term. And, we haven't defined hybrid. So for the purpose here, you have companies who are saying, everyone go back to the office. That's one group. And you have everyone who says, you know what, this is so good, we're going to be 100% remote. And we're going to forget both of those for a minute. And we're going to be the 80% in the middle that says, going forward, most employees will spend some days in the office and some days remote. And I've been very vocal to say the experience has to be the same. And so whether I'm working in the office, whether I'm in my home office, or whether I'm traveling and I'm somewhere else, I need to be able to log in and I need to have the same experience. I need to have the same access to the drives and the network. I need to have the same Zoom experience because, up until recently in my organization, in all honesty, if you had a laptop, you had one Zoom experience, but if you didn't and you were using VDI or virtual desktop, you had a very different experience. And Microsoft Teams didn't work the same up until recently. And the ability to have my desk phone, which has a New York number, follow me either on my laptop or on my mobile didn't exist when we first started, or didn't exist in the way it exists now. And it doesn't exist even today across the entire organization. And that's a huge problem. And even going forward, think about what it's like sitting in an office. Remember when we all sat in offices? And you may, going forward, have 3 people in the office and 3 people who are on the screen. And you know what it was like in the past. If you were the remote person on the screen, you couldn't hear, people talked over you, the microphones were either in the table overhead and you hear the rustling of paper all the time. And it was a very bad experience and you were almost forgotten. And that needs to change. And I think that's it's a cultural change, and it's coming from, IT is the implementer, but it really needs to come from the organization of how do we truly make this hybrid environment work. And people are talking about we're going back to work because we need to maintain the culture. That's a huge part of the company culture that we will either get right or frankly screw up if we don't get the hybrid technology right. And we're all part of that. Those of us who are attorneys, we're doing the contracts, and we're looking at the data that I keep talking about, where it's going and how it's flowing, and the access and the rights and the protections, not just from a technology. I don't do the technology piece, but I'm looking at it from a policy standpoint and from a contract standpoint, and how is this working? And there's a whole lot of pieces to that I don't think we've all figured out yet.
Definitely important. Deb, any additional strategies or lessons that we can take away?
Yeah, I would agree with Alan that organizations are still figuring out how do we work, operate, respond, and recover in these environments. So it's a good time to take a beat, right? Look into what got deployed, see if security may need to be tightened up on some of those aspects. Consider whether interim solutions deployed quickly and out of necessity may not be the most cost-effective way to go, or may not align with the organization's longer-term needs and goals. Some of the things that organizations pushed out quickly don't fit, for instance, zero trust architecture. Expanding visibility and comprehensive enterprise monitoring, that's the holy grail, right? Focusing on devices and users, bringing all the endpoints under central management, centralizing security data, and using the speed and power of AI to contextualize threat intelligence, to analyze and sift through all the white noise and sheer volume of alerts that security teams face every day, and transferring that into telemetry and intelligence that aids decision-making and incident response. You really need a 360-degree external and internal threat intelligence view that's actionable in order to stay a few steps ahead and simulate countermeasures. But remember, I think it's important to keep in mind that any tools we have, the hackers have too. They're using AI, they're using machine language, they're using the cloud for cost-effective platforms to launch their attacks. I think the pandemic emphasized the need to expect and plan for the unexpected. Organizations are certainly bolstering plans and preparedness. They're increasing readiness by dusting off the outdated and perhaps untested business continuity and DR plans. They're ensuring resiliency of their systems and infrastructure. That's an area where I think, Alan, you mentioned cloud can help, right? And they're conducting scenario-based planning exercises because cloud is enabling the future of the workplace and workspace. One last thing, and Tony, you touched upon this, but I just want to really drive it home too. Training staff on cloud services is essential. You cannot expect employees who either use or manage it just to know the rules of the road in using cloud-based applications and services. Developers might not necessarily know how to develop and deploy apps in a cloud-hosted environment. Training enables users to understand what's changing and how to use it properly. So emphasis, underline, bold, train.
Training is definitely key. Oh, Tony, do you have one more comment?
Yeah, can I jump in really? Because Alan touched on something that I want to emphasize too. When we talk a little bit more about the cultural aspect of this, and Deb certainly has alluded to this, the importance of this. Our organization shifted to a remote first model as a result of the pandemic. We had about 25 to 30% of our workforce in a remote environment prior to the pandemic. When we, March 13th was that day, that cutover day, and we went remote first at that point. Our CEO decided to do a shift, do a complete pivot, and creating a remote first model. So you have to have permission to come into the office, fully vaccinated, come into the office. But really, we leveled the playing field. The folks that were, remote for such a long time prior to the pandemic now feel much more integrated into the culture of the organization. When we're all on a Zoom call, or we use Teams, when we're all on a Teams call together, it's not a matter, we've helped to mitigate that unconscious bias around distance because everybody is equalized in the team's environment. And that has actually really been an important cultural aspect in the organization too. You get a lot more buy-in, a lot more participation, a lot more collaboration with the entirety of your team when they all feel as though there's a little bit of a level playing field. We're noticing, again, we use hybrid in the terms of hybrid, work environment, but also hybrid technologies, which I think is important to distinguish. But I kind of wanted to underscore there is that cultural benefit of really trying to shift your thinking about how you're deploying remote and whether or not remote does make more sense in many circumstances.
Excellent point. Excellent point. Thank you. Well, I want to shift to kind of the key question that kind of ties back into the title for the webinar, but I want to set it up first. So when I was working for a financial services company, the CEO told me, he said, "Antony, I hate lawyers." And I asked, "Why, Mr. CEO?" And he said, "Because they always tell me no. They tell me why I can't do things." And so there's always been this love and maybe perhaps mostly hate relationship between those who focus primarily on their business hat and those who focus primarily on their lawyer hat. And so this whole question about this view that security teams and lawyers are getting in the way of the business transactions and slowing down business transformation due to the time it really takes to assess the impact of these different technologies and processes on both security and data privacy. And so the question, I'll give back to Tony first. What are the proactive approaches, Tony, that organizations and CISOs and privacy officers and their teams should consider in addressing security and privacy without hindering innovation? Or, as our session title would suggest, how do you lead at the pace of change?
So, Dean Haynes, for us, we've really tried to become the my group, my ops team is really the yes if or yes and. We will get to the result you want to get to if we can do these things, or but we're gonna need to be able to do this, and the other first. Part of it is an underlying creating a culture of security and really ensuring that you have the culture of security in place and understand that security is really a driver of the organization. I'll talk about that a little bit more. Being thoughtful, proactive, cooperative, but our clients really demand security. And so we've really tried to take our environment and shift to using security as an enabler of the business and helping to ensure that the security is actually a benefit, something that we're offering to our clients. I think part of that is also driven by our enterprise risk culture. We have an enterprise risk culture that I've set up that actually has everybody from all business units are participating in the enterprise risk program and into our change review board. So there's participation from everybody in the organization, from every business unit in the organization. So everybody has, every organization has a role in decision-making when it comes to innovation. So when a new technology is thought of, when something, because of course you've got your business development people who are out there going, "Hey, we need this, we need it now." And we're like, okay, we're going to hit the pause button a little bit. Let's walk through it. What do you really need? And then, we can work on that. And while we may slow things down at some point, I think, again, people have become to understand that the slowing things down really does help promote innovation in the organization because we're doing it right and we're doing it with security in mind.
Thank you. Great perspective. Alan, any additional thoughts or reactions to Tony's perspective?
Well, first you hurt my heart. I'm not even sure what I want to say, but in my first privacy role in 2004, and it was an online marketing company, and one of the technical people took me aside and said, "Alan, let me show you how this works." And he showed me how tracking pixels work and how they capture this and how we gather names, and we were buying and selling and doing all this stuff that you did back then. And it really opened up my eyes, if you will, to the importance of working with the technical groups. And so, because, as Tony just said, the business is going to come in and said, I actually had one of these conversations literally this morning. I want to do X. And I'm the lead cybersecurity and data protection and data resiliency counsel in a, $1 billion a year organization. And, my role is just not to say no. It's it's first thing to understand what is, as Tony said, what is it you're trying to do, and what's the end result you're trying to get to. And there are times when I have to put up the stop sign that says, no, I have a regulatory requirement that says I need to save data, or I need to do this or that. And that tool you're looking at may not do it, but let's find one that will. And we get to do that together. And there are times when it's not a yes or no answer. There are times when it's like, it's not perfect, but I think the risk is low, and we go forward on that basis. And so it's a continuum of, absolutely yes, this is grand on one side, and absolutely not, because I have a regulation where someone's going to prison on the other. And it's somewhere, which is the vast majority in between, that our role, and those of you who are, online, who are watching, as attorneys or people who are implementing this, need to be a little bit more flexible, and need to, to really look at, there's a lot of pieces, as we talked earlier, you have new regulatory pieces. You have regulators looking at cyber and data protection that they've never done before. You have consumers looking at it. If you have consumer clients who are looking at, I want my data protected, and I want to be able to take it out and do things with it that 3 to 5 years ago, no one ever thought of. You have regulators like Congress and state legislators looking at what you're doing and how this is working in ways that didn't happen before. And I think the combination of this, you need to be part of that. Well, let's put it this way: if you always know, you don't get a seat at the table. So you need to be part of the conversation, and there is an opportunity in many cases to lead it.
Thank you so much, Alan. Deb, what are your thoughts?
So I'm going to shamelessly say, capitalize on momentum from the pandemic, right? Enabling technologies help protect digital processes and environments that IT teams help to build out for the business, and organizations relied on their technology partners to help them implement remote working solutions, along with new and sometimes untested virtual collaboration tools, new supply chain responses, and so on. But you truly have to listen. You secure innovation through trust, and I don't mean zero trust. You have to have the knowledge and expertise to recommend a technology solution that fits the customer's needs. You have to build and maintain a track record of doing the right thing on a consistent basis. And you have to possess insight into emerging trends and have confidence to advocate for change. You have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable, if you will. New processes, new ways of working require the cultural shift that has been referenced before. So you'll have to manage that change. Nobody likes change, right? I mean, it's all about influencing heart and minds, managing stakeholders, organizational change management, and again, training. Ensuring business alignment, tying security initiatives to business objectives, being outcome focused, right? The don't say no, say let's go, let's help you get there. Talk about and showcase how security delivers business value, how it helps you differentiate your organization from the rest, and then tap into federal funding, right? Example, funding available through the American Rescue Plan to boost cybersecurity where you can, measure performance, talk about it as a business differentiator, as an enabler, and be flexible and agile. Last but not least, be ready to address your strategies, because your course of action may not work. Not all good ideas fly, and integrating cyber risk management with enterprise risk management is the mark of a maturity in an organization, I think.
Thank you, Deb. Well, at this point, I would like to get some engagement from the audience. I have a whole set of additional questions, but I want to leave the audience out. And I know the chat has been active, so I'm going to go ahead and address a couple of those questions. If you have some questions as an attendee and you haven't already typed them into the chat, please do so we can go ahead and try to consider them. So the first question I see is one that says this: is multi-factor authentication technology more likely to be adopted and embraced by younger employees than older employees who perhaps don't really have this technology in their DNA in the same way that younger employees do? And I don't know if there's anybody on our panel who wants to take that question first, because we each have our own perspective.
I'm going to say that age doesn't have anything to do with it, right? It's really about people understanding the why behind the technology deployment, and understanding how it not only protects them, protects the organization and reduces risk, So I think most people, bank online, shop online, they're used to it. And, contrary to the opinion or the conversation, Antony, that you and I had offline, I think most people are good with it. That's my take on it.
Yeah, I'll just say that my mother has taught me a lot about technology. So, okay, it's like, so I don't know. And I guess I take exception as being one of the older people in the room that, it's like, yeah, I've seen it embraced across the organization. I can't say that I've seen a differentiator between for, younger people adopting technology more. If anything, I've seen interest in innovation coming from people that have been in the workplace a little bit longer, who are really trying to expand their own, ways of doing business and improve, because they've seen it, they've done it, and now they're trying to improve upon that. So,
thank you so much. I will make one comment here. I had a age-wise, physically older student in my face-to-face JD legal class. And I made a comment of some sort on the idea that younger lawyers, and I meant seniority in career time as opposed to age, may be more adapted to technology. And the student reminded me, no, Dean Haynes, it's not a matter of age or seniority, it's just a matter of, are you good at technology or not? So we do have some biases and perceptions that may color our views, and we do have to check those and be careful. So thank you, Tony, for your comment. It's definitely on point. Older age-wise people may be more tech savvy than younger age-wise people in many scenarios. Another question from the audience is this: the public sector is finding that frictionless transactions are far more likely to drive fraud if there isn't a speed bump somewhere, especially when there isn't a payment involved. And an example given is that the New York State's Department of Labor unemployment filings may be an area of this being a problem. And there's a follow-up from another student that says that this is very interesting, a very interesting comment. And so I just wanted to know whether or not, I'm sorry, maybe the other part. Government administration and connecting customer-facing privacy and regulations emerging. Yeah, so same idea here. So is there any feedback on this idea of adding friction as a way of reducing fraud, as opposed to keeping it frictionless?
Yes, I think there's a fine balance between adding enough identity verification to determine whether that's a person, right? And if it's the person that should get and has the right to receive benefits, and not standing up so much friction, if you use that word again, or so much challenge that the persons that are supposed to get the benefit can't, right? Or denied, inexplicably denied being able to get the benefit. So I think there's a balance there. There's a right and left of the spectrum of putting it in. But I think many of these context-based or AI-aided that look for behavioral aspects, where is it coming from? Is it a multiple request? Is it coming from a person who's been identified as perpetuating fraud in another state, right? There's just so much information out there that can be aggregated and contextualized to aid. So I think AI and machine learning is going to aid and abet that balance.
There was something interesting in that question, in that, the example, and maybe it was just from the person who said it, was New York State Department of Labor, but for all the organizations, and my company was the same date as Tony, March 13th, it was a Friday, that was the last day I saw my office. And I figured I'd be back in 2 weeks. And, here we are 18 months later. You didn't hear companies having the same issue, private organizations, than you did with entities that were handing out money to individuals. You didn't see it from banks. You didn't hear it from Social Security. It was only in a small number, you heard about it in, unemployment benefits and the expanded benefits. And I'm wondering, is that the difference? And Deb may smack me under the table if she could, or tell me I'm right. Is it the difference of private entities being better funded or better prepared to, we weren't prepared to have the entire organization shift to remote, but somehow we modeled our way through it without issue, or with virtually none. But what was the difference? There's something different about that, and I'm unsure what it is, but it raises a good question. Why was it public and not private? You
I think that
never
was
heard anything privately.
a question for Deb, right? From Alan to Deb.
I'm going to say from me primarily to Deb, because that's your world, but it's at least a question to ask out loud. But I never heard of a single, you never heard of X bank all of a sudden had everyone's accounts drained, but everyone worked home the same way.
Organizations, so good point, Alan. I think organizations that were already either because they had a global footprint or because they were working remotely, they had a remote and telecommute presence. So the more that was true, the better prepared that organization was to make the shift to a total remote workforce than those who had maybe 5 to 10%. So I think it was magnitude. I think it was the swift transition of the all to remote work and all of the training and fundamental policy changes that comes with that, as well as the technology expansion and problems like having to expand your VPN scale rapidly and having to be able to buy licenses on the fly and spin up and configure things on the fly. So I think it was that more than anything else. And that's my view from a national perspective and talking to government organizations as well as private sector.
Just real quick. So I think we saw a little bit of I think flexibility and being able to be nimble were critical at that time and continue to be critical in that ability to be flexible. A lot of people were really, we had several clients who still had desktop machines. They couldn't move into a remote environment. We had everybody on laptops, and so everybody could move quickly. We could innovate. We had foresight to be able to upgrade our firewalls and do some stuff in advance so that we could ensure that we could have the technology in place. Not everybody was capable of doing that. And I've seen it vary because some larger organizations really got caught with their, really stuck because their infrastructure didn't allow them to be able to be as nimble as they needed to be. And I think that came to bear. There's another point that I wanted to just jump in on, because when we talk about innovation, we talk about innovation in the pace of change. And we've talked about like delivering benefits at the state level or some of that. Part of what we need to be thinking about as innovation is ensuring that everybody has access to the technology. That is still a huge issue for us as a country, is making certain that people have access to technology. As we're deploying technological solutions to be able to deliver benefits to folks, how are we ensuring and how are we innovating around the ability to be able to bring technology to the people who don't have access to it? That's just something that last question just prompted for me. I thought I'd just drop out there.
Sure. That's a great point, Tony. Thank you so much. For the attendees, I want to point out that a topic that we did not get to today is the topic of cyber insurance. And the Albany Law School series on cybersecurity and data privacy will have a future webinar that will focus just on cyber insurance. And Deb and I had conversations in years past on this very topic. So it's always a topic that comes back. A question from one of our attendees is for the panel as a whole. How can we, what advice do we have? How can we help small cyber firms with developing their public sector business? What kind of tips do you have as the panel?
So how do they get out there and get the work? It sort of sounds like that's the question. Well, know the audience you're trying to attract, know what their problems are, be very, very much invested in understanding the types of common threats and risks that they face. Go in prepared. Oh my gosh, I used to shake my finger at so many vendors and say, don't come in here. You haven't read our strategic plan. You don't know a darn thing about New York. Don't waste my time. If you come in and you have something that fits a problem I have, then we have a conversation. But definitely do your homework, right? Understand that sector, understand where they're coming from, what their pain points are, know if they've had any recent incidents, and then talk fit. Right? Don't just have a conversation and try to get them to swap out a tool they already have. That's work. And they've got enough on their plate right now. They're busy folks, and wasting their time is the worst thing you can do. So I think listening and really determining whether it's a conversation that makes sense to be had.
Yeah. Having a solution to a problem that I actually have. and not creating another problem for me in the process. When I'm assessing vendors, I'm also looking at whether or not this is a vendor that I can bring in that is actually going to meet my minimum security requirements. So come prepared to have that discussion. Come prepared to say, look, this is what we offer as an organization. We're SOC compliant, we do SOC, we're NIST, we're ISO 2, whatever it may be. Come prepared to be able to talk about your own infrastructure, because as a vendor to large financial institutions, I'm being hammered every week by a vendor risk assessment, and I've got to downstream that to my vendors as well. And so I've got to ensure that we've got a robust vendor risk assessment program. And so if any third party that's going to play with us has to play with us on our terms.
Can I use some of my learning from my LL.M program? Because this is outside of my normal world. But in one of my courses, I was assigned to work with a government agency, and we got to work on a NIST. We did the NIST assessment together, and I could see an organization like that, which underfunded, desperate for resources. So as Deb said, you can't just go in and say, oh, you need to swap out this equipment, and it might be $5,000 that they don't have. But there were definitely areas on doing a NIST framework assessment with somebody that would be a relatively inexpensive thing. You don't need equipment and tools. It was done with interviews, and coming back and presenting it to them may be a way of getting yourself in the door. And particularly on, you're not going to go into New York State, which has thousands of employees, or the Department of Ed, which has 100,000 people, but there might be an IT organization, there are lots of them actually, that may have 20 people that have, there may be 1,000 smaller projects that you can do, that you can grow into and get your name out there in that environment.
I think an important point that you're making, Alan, is that every organization is going to be in a different place in terms of resources and capability maturity. So you have to meet them where they are in their journey. And you have to be able to give them advice to help them assess that and know where to start in evaluating and prioritizing investments to improve security and privacy. How do they identify their crown jewels? Critical business functions. Start by doing the basics right. Conduct the security risk assessment. Conduct a privacy impact assessment while you're at it. Different folks, and different views, but still overlapping controls. And then develop a strategic plan that gets you there, right? Specific objectives, prioritize that you can present and monitor and report progress on to demonstrate that, again, the business value of security.
Thank you. And we are running over time. I know Tom has come here to get the little hook to pull me off the stage, the gong show. But Tom, if you will allow me to ask one last question of our panelists before we go, and this may also kind of put an exclamation point on the last question. And so my final question is this for each of the panelists, and we'll start with Deb for this. So Deb, you've worked with a lot of corporate organizations as a CIOs and CISOs over the years. How do you think the roles and the responsibilities of the CISO has changed over the last couple of years?
That's a great question, because it has over the past 2 decades. I mean, modern security is really leadership led, tone from the top. There's been a definite shift in the CISO's role and duty, where it started out as somewhat tech centric, not me, but generally in CISOs were typically a person with solid technical skills and background coming from an IT role who could understand basic defensive tools and techniques. But that's shifted. Now soft skills are as important as technical skills. CISOs are members of the C-suite team. They have a leadership role and a regular access to senior management. They have to be able to sell and support the business, if you will, seeing how cyber fits into business overall. They need to be able to speak business, and their responsibilities also include continuous learning. It's such a dynamic environment. So effective management, effective messaging, good communication, good defenses, the ability to influence people, partnerships, all of those things are now part of the CISO's objectives and skill set, as well as all the other things you'd normally naturally expect.
Thank you. And Tom, I'm gonna break my deal here. I have one more question. From the audience, there was this question about, is it plausible to transform towards this type of a professional focus without being a highly technical person or one with a technical background? And I'll take this one very quickly. The answer is yes, with an exclamation point. There are many law and policy individuals who lack an IT background who are leaders in this space, or else people who have a legal background who are leaders in this space, or people who have no legal background and no IT background and are leaders in this space. And our program at Albany Law School, both the Masters of Science in Legal Studies and the LL.M. are designed to do just that, to help transition those people who lack the technical expertise to get into the law and policy space and become proficient. And if you want to talk offline with Deb Snyder, she can talk to you a lot about not being an IT person by training and yet being a leader in this field.
Yeah, I'm also not an IT person by training.
And I'm sorry, also Tony as well.
Yeah, no,
and
no,
Alan had to learn the hard way. So there you go.
Yeah, so.
So I'm the anomaly. I'm the actual
TV.
person with an IT background.
Any
Okay,
final
back to you.
thoughts? Any final thoughts? We're past the 2 o'clock mark, so I think we should cut it off to respect the time of our attendees. But Tony, Deb, Alan, I want to thank you very much for participating in the forum, and to Dean Haynes for serving as expert moderator today. We're actually really proud to be able to pull together faculty, students, alumni, and friends of the law school for events like this, and to share publicly all of your thought leadership on these topics. So thank you very much. And to the attendees, please take a moment, if you haven't done so, to fill out that brief survey. It really does help us out with our programming for future. For now, I'll say goodbye, and this concludes today's event.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.